What's going on, everybody? Welcome into another episode of the Strength for Your Purpose podcast. For the first time in quite a while, I am actually solo today here on the 60th episode of the podcast, mainly because I wanted to take a second and recap a little bit of what we've talked about since the start of 2022. So here we are, most of the way, believe it or not, about halfway exactly here through March. And we have had some incredible information coming in via these interviews and these conversations we have. So first and foremost, if you haven't listened from episode 50 on, by all means, you can listen to this episode. You're not going to not understand anything that we're going to go over today, but go back and check those interviews out because it'll make that much more sense. And it'll give the things that I'm going to talk about very quickly and not in as much detail hold a lot more weight and have more of an impact on you as you are listening to these. But as we've seen in the past, the last 10 episodes or so of the podcast have had kind of a common theme going on. They really have. And the theme here is that self-care is not selfish. Okay, self-care is not selfish. And if we can invest in ourselves, in our mental health, emotional health, our spiritual health, our physical health, and make some of those things a priority, all of the other stressors in life, all the other things we might have to check off that to-do list on a day-to-day basis, everything we need to show up for, we are going to be that much better for. So the trends really have been taking better care of ourselves from not only a prevention standpoint, but also from a work in progress standpoint, because we all are works in progress. Some of these things we're going to talk about, or that we have talked about in these interviews on the podcast, are not things that are always preventable. Maybe they're things we've been dealing with for a really long time that we want to work on, whatever the case might be. So, and doing so with some grace, giving ourselves some leeway and not being so darn hard on ourselves. For those of you that listen to the podcast, you'll recognize who that is from. We'll definitely hit on that. But it was just so interesting. There's definitely a few of the people that we've interviewed that have been on the podcast before in this string of interviews, but the things they kind of talked about and hit on this time were a little bit different than previous episodes where they've been on, and really went with this theme of you are not selfish for taking care of yourself. And in fact, you have to be selfish in that way, or you cannot then be selfless. We can't be selfless without being selfish first. Okay. I had someone say this the other day. I don't remember if it was in a conversation now, or yes, it was in a conversation with a client. Actually, I was talking to them, and they brought up the old adage of treat your neighbor like you would treat yourself. Do unto others as you would do unto yourself. And they brought up the very interesting point that what that saying actually implies is that you're already taking care of yourself. Whoa. Let's let that sink in for a second. Do unto others as you would do unto yourself. If you aren't taking care of yourself, how can you be then expected to take good care of others? And when we're talking about showing up for our family and things like that, I mean, all of us have the capability, the faculties to sacrifice some of our own selves for that. But I just thought that was powerful. I think we're going to be, and I think the point there is that it's not impossible, but you're going to be that much better at showing up for other people if you are first and foremost showing up for yourself. So I want to get into some of these trends, and I want to start right back at episode 50, the 50th episode of the podcast, where I got to go on location at the Business of Happiness podcast studios. That one, if you've heard it on the podcast here on the audio version and have not seen it, the video on YouTube, the video on YouTube is fantastic. We had Dr. Taryn McCarthy and I had a lot of fun there, and her studio is beautiful. and it was great to chat in person like that. It was the first time I've done an in-person podcast, which is super exciting. But the big take home that Dr. Taryn McCarthy of the Business of Happiness and I talked about was celebrating yourself, looking back and reflecting on where you've gone. Because we did this. I asked her to be the 50th episode because the idea of starting a podcast for myself was kind of hers after I was on her podcast, which the Business of Happiness podcast. And so I wanted her to be the 50th episode. And we talked about taking the time to look at me, like, look what you've done. Look at the accomplishments you've made, because we all get in this grind of what we're doing now and what needs to be done now to get where we ultimately want to be. But we lose the focus of that. We lose the drive to want to do that if we don't stop and reflect about on all of the things we've accomplished thus far. So celebrating yourself, which is and celebrating your accomplishments, is huge. And it's not arrogant. Okay. It's not, I think we sometimes don't do it because maybe we think we're coming off as arrogant, but giving yourself a good old pat on the back every once in a while, even in a public way, I think is totally okay. And if people are there to support you, they're going to understand that, and they're going to pat you on the back too. We then moved from that episode into something that sort of goes along with that, where we talked to Bo Balcavage about leadership and how all of us are leaders of ourselves, right? And simply that decision of when to celebrate what you've done, kind of look back and rejoice in what you've done, versus I really got to put my head down and get through this. It's a leadership decision, right? We are leading ourselves in that moment. That is 100% a leadership decision. We make decisions day in and day out, whether it's for our own personal day, things we do or don't do with our family, things we want our kids to do, don't allow our kids to do, things we do at work, even if we aren't managing a team. All of those things, all of those decisions we make are based in leadership. They're just maybe leadership of our own self. So we are all leaders, and if we can treat ourselves like leaders and think of ourselves like leaders and lead ourselves in a well-rounded and positive way, that's going to bleed over to other parts of our life. And you just have to start with one area. Maybe you need to lead yourself to read more. Maybe you need to lead yourself to actually hit your goal of how many days per week you're going to work out. Whatever you need to lead yourself, but pick one area. And that was part of what Bo said. Once you pick one area and get that area developed within leadership and get good leadership in that area, it's going to spill over to other areas of your life. And we know that those areas of our lives, even though they're different areas, whether it be, work, life at home, life with our friends, organizations we're involved in, those are all very, we compartmentalize them all. But physical, mental, and emotional stressors from all of those areas undoubtedly bleed over into each other, which that episode led perfectly into the next two, actually, with Peter Koch and with Tisha Bremner. Yeah, Tisha Bremner, and both talking about very different things, but in through the workplace lens. So Peter Koch of Memic and Tisha Bremner, who has her own corporate coaching and consulting that she does, and both of them really talking a lot about how investing in ourselves to flourish at work can bleed over to home. And a lot of the things that we're doing, Peter's standpoint, Peter and I talked a lot about workplace injury prevention and preparing our bodies for the work that we're going to do, no matter how physical it is so important. Because if we get injured at work, it's not going to stay at work when we clock out. And if we get injured at home, when we clock in at work, that injury is still going to be with us, right? It's not going to stay at home. And Tisha focused much more on the mental and emotional part of it. One of her favorite tips was fill her up and go. Do the things that are really filling up, kind of filling up your cup and getting you excited and getting out there and filling your cup mentally and emotionally. But the same thing is true if we are stressed, if we are bogged down mentally, emotionally at work or at home, it is going to affect our relationships, our our focus, our stress levels in all areas of life. And we're not going to be as good if we don't take care of those things and prepare ourselves mentally, emotionally, and physically to work. The other thing that really pairs nicely with that fill her up and go tip that Tisha gave us was the followed her up in the next episode with Trisha McIntyre of Perfect Fit Health and Fitness in Scarborough, coming on talking about her passion and how her passion of helping others get healthy actually took her out of a corporate environment and basically made herself not go back to it in order to help people. And I think finding what lights you up is probably the most important thing you can do, whether we're talking in our career, whether we're talking, hobbies in our personal life, so that we're keeping our mental and emotional health and wellness in check, whether we are talking about a health journey, the type of exercise that you do to get healthier, finding that passion and then feeding yourself in that and growing it and leaning into your passion is going to make all other areas in your life so much better, because the stressors that come from whatever that passion then is, whatever that passion sort of adds to your life, it's never going to be stressful stress, if that makes sense. I say that all the time. I as a business owner, as a podcast host here, you get stressed about things all the time, but it's almost that healthy kind of stress. Like, okay, I've got to figure this out. And I love figuring this out because it allows me to do what I really want to be doing. So, and Trisha's turned that into helping other people reach their full potential and improve their quality of movement while improving their health as well. And the other thing when we're talking about starting up a journey or finding your passion, leaning into it, is sometimes that has to be done at the right time. All of these things have to be done at the right time. And starting a self-care program can be incredibly hard, right? So we're talking through this episode of how self-care isn't selfish, and we need to be selfish to be selfless. Okay, to take care of other people, we need to take care of ourselves. And in the episode that followed Trisha McIntyre's episode, I talked with Sandy Woznicki and Jason Gutman, where we talked a lot about the stress related to beginning a self-care program, whether that be mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, whatever. And the big takeaway I wanted to share with you all from that episode, because it pairs so well with everything we've talked about so far, because I don't know about you all, but as I talk about these things, I'm like, wow, this is kind of a lot to keep in mind and maybe to work on. And we're not applying this to just one thing. We're applying this to so many different areas of our lives. And the biggest thing that we talked about with Sandy and Jason on that episode was managing our expectations and not being so darn hard on ourselves, because we can't expect. One of my favorite quotes from that episode was Sandy talking about a client that she had that, by a majority of standards, even from like a scientific and health and wellness standard, is a very fit person, but was very down on herself because she wasn't eating as well as she could be, meaning that, there's things like the TB12 diet and things like that. She was comparing herself to a professional athlete. Her expectations were through the roof on this, and it actually held her back. And that tied in so with one of my other favorite quotes from one of these recent episodes, which was with Megan Field of Field Nutrition, Nutrition in Motion in Scarborough. And Megan talked about, like, when you slip up in, and this quote goes for more than just nutrition, but she was looking at it from a nutrition scope. She was talking about how when you slip up in a diet, you have the piece of cake, or you don't follow the exact plan that you're having, like recognizing what that was, accepting that it happened, not beating yourself up over it, and then moving on. It's okay. It is okay. So we need to manage our expectations. We need to not hold ourselves to a standard that's so high that it actually stresses us out that we'll never be able to achieve it. And if we trip up, that's okay. We know where we need to be and we know how to get back on course. So let's just pivot and get back on course. and that brings me to another area that one of our guests really helped bolster and support, and that was Paul Marquis, who's a fellow physical therapist, and who was doing a lot of work to try to help physical therapists like myself be better for our clients that we work with, show up in a way that adds extra value and goes above and beyond for that person. And obviously from a physical therapy perspective, that's great, and I love it, and I'm so on board with what Paul is doing at Ortho Eval Pal. But just from a global perspective, taking that idea and kind of turning it into, you need to have people on your team, whether that's at home or the professionals you're working with, that are doing that for you. I remember I had a boss once, and we were chatting about like checking in with people and wondering maybe how people are doing with appointments. And I was like, yeah, sometimes I just feel like I wish I could just like text them and reach out to them and just see like, hey, how's it going? And I've done that before, like I had done that before at that company, like on the phone, give them a call and see how they're doing. But, and he immediately was like, I would not want anyone to have my number. My worst fear is that these people could contact me outside of work. I was like, wow, well, that's one way to look at it. I mean, I understand creating boundaries for ourselves, and you wouldn't necessarily want these people badgering you about things 24/7. And I think if you drew that line, it would be okay. But all of my clients have my personal number now, and they get a hold of me when they need me, and I get a hold of them when I need them. And there's sort of a natural boundary there anyway. So going that extra mile, doing that little extra, giving a little extra value, and making sure that they're invested in you as much as you're invested in the process that they're helping you through, I think is huge. And our last two people I just wanted to touch on real quick to round out this recap of self-care is with Erdem Anklari with Virtue, Fitness, and Health. And how he talked about being virtuous in health and taking your health to a higher standard. I loved where his story came from, and I loved his passion behind being a virtuous person and like raising that bar mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually for ourselves, and what that can do not only for ourselves but for the people around us. That was just last week's episode, so make sure you definitely check that interview out. Or them was fantastic to talk to, and he has a really great story of how he got to where he is right now. And then the last thing I want to mention that really rounds this all out is Dr. Nick Roy of Saco River Dentistry coming on and talking about sleep and how positions of our jaw and our teeth and things can actually affect sleep and sleep apnea and things like that. And we all need sleep to show up for ourselves. This is why I saved this for last. This might be one of the most important things we talked about here is, and actually, let me back up. He didn't talk about sleep. He talked about our airway and having an open airway and how we can improve our airway and our breathing both through the day and at night through certain dental appliances and techniques that allow us to sleep better and refuel us for our day. And boy, I don't know about you all, but I can operate fairly well without maybe eating as much as I should. And I think all of us probably operate at a level of exercise that's not as good for us as it could be, but trying to operate on little to no sleep or poor quality sleep, that's a game changer. That's a whole different ball game, and that is super important. So I know we covered a lot there, and it was just bits and pieces. So I really encourage you to go back and listen to those interviews, download, listen to those episodes, watch them on YouTube, because you will see this overall theme where we are just trying to make ourselves better, and that is okay. And we need to start there and make ourselves better before we can make anyone else better and take care of anyone else. So be selfish to be selfless, and self-care, taking care of yourself, is not selfish. It's something we have to do to show up better for others and give more to the people around us, which is what I'm here for. I'm here to help people, but I know that if I don't take care of my body, I can't go, my body, my mind, my spirit, I can't go give my all to people because I have nothing to give myself. So I hope you all learned something from that. I know it was a quick recap, but go check out those episodes. The link to those episodes will actually be in the show notes for this episode. Make sure you like, subscribe, download, share, be a friend, tell a friend, spread the word about this podcast. Just want to get this information out to as many people as possible so that we can help even more people live a happy, healthy, and wealthy life, doing what they love with who they love, and strengthen their true purpose in life, mentally, emotionally, and physically. Go make it a great week, everybody. We'll see you back here next week on the Strength for Your Purpose podcast. Bye-bye.